Hi, this is John Johnson from Edgeworth Economics and Edgeworth Analytics, and you're listening to EA Interviews.
EA Interviews, episode 274.
Inspiration, transformation, success stories, and the Imperfect Action Round. 7 days a week. Join Mario Ficini for today's Expert Authority Effect interview.
How important is good data? It's very important, and it's something you should consider in your business if you want to be more profitable. You can't be doing that with bad data. If you want to know who's the right person to hire, you can't be doing that with bad data. And that's why I'm excited to have the CEO of Edgeworth Analytics here, author and PhD from MIT, expert witness on data analysis, John Johnson. I'm going to have him up right after we thank our sponsor. Every business needs a book, including yours. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com today to learn the 7 steps to publish and promote your nonfiction lead and profit-generating business book in 8 weeks. Once again, that's freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, John Johnson. John, how are you feeling today?
Doing great. Thanks so much, Mario. Great to be here.
I am excited for what you have to share because you have a unique perspective and expertise on data analysis. And I know some people talk about data like, oh, it's important, this and that. And I think a lot of people realize you should have data, but your level of expertise on it, I've never seen before. What would you say is the most important thing with data that all businesses should consider?
Well, I would say that data doesn't come ready to use. And I think sort of our biggest sort of mistake people make is they think, well, I have a data set or we must have data, so I can just analyze it and go. Most of data analytics actually is the time spent to prepare and think about whether the data is right. So I think that's the single biggest thing you have to know before you embark on any data analysis is this data even usable? And what do I want to accomplish with it?
How do you know if it's usable?
That's a great question. I think a starting point that I always say is that you have to sort of first really understand the question that you're going to want to answer. And that's going to inform whether the data can help you or not. There are certain decisions, bet the company decisions that you better be certain you have great data for. There's other decisions sort of, well, we're trying to figure out how to stock our supply shelf for things that are less important, but that you still may want to have some kind of analysis. And so you want to know, all right, is the data I have going to inform the question, given the relative importance of the question I'm trying to answer? We can get lots of things where we can do better than just chance occurrence or better than just guessing by using data. And then there's those decisions you really want to be certain about. And you have to think about, okay, I really need the best possible, most pristine data to answer this question.
Okay, so where do you get it from?
Look, most people are sitting on mountains and mountains of data in their companies. There are sort of estimates from IBM that, 95% of the world's data gets created every 2 years. And that number is actually probably shrinking at this point in terms of being quicker. So when you have a company, a business, more often than not, in the ordinary course of your business, whether it's through your accounting systems, your HR systems, the Excel spreadsheets you use to manage your business, you probably are sitting on a lot of the data you need to start to understand and make the decisions you have. Now, there are other external sources, and sometimes that's useful, but I always think the starting point is, well, what do you have to run your business? That's probably where the answer to your data questions lie.
I want to ask you about deciding, how do you decide between financial data, marketing data, HR data? Where would you say is a good place to start? I know you said it depends on the question you're asking, but there's so much data.
Yeah, look, there's always a lot of data. And I think, of course, the question informs it. But at the same time, it also could be what's the most accessible to you, right? Your financial data might well be that what you can get your hands wrapped around the quickest or easiest. And so maybe that's the right place to go. I mean, there's a combination. I think sort of sometimes we let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough when we're trying to do business decisions. Obviously, data can be quite messy and can be a little bit ugly. But if we try to think about it in terms of, all right, where can we get the most valuable information for our most pressing needs? I think that's usually the way I start as I think about, all right, well, what's accessible? What do you have? Where do we go from there?
If you want to increase the company's profits, do you think you should only rely on the financial data?
No, I think that would be a pretty big oversimplification. Data does not exist in a vacuum. In other words, I'm not one of those data scientist, analytics type people that's going to tell you, well, you only should think about the data and nothing but the data when you approach your problems. In fact, I think sound data analytics is formulated by what you know about your business. And then you use the data to help confirm or reject maybe your preconceived notions. You think about it more systematically, but let's take a simple example. If I'm dealing with hiring a new consultant for my business, or I'm trying to think about a long run strategy of sort of hiring, I care a lot more about my hiring strategy and my HR data than I do about my current profitability data. So it really depends on what the time frame is and how you're thinking about your business.
Now, you're saying you do a lot of hiring as well. How does that incorporate into the success of the company while you're analyzing the analytics?
Well, when we think about sort of candidates, we're always thinking about sort of a longer term strategy. What makes ultimately a successful employee? How can we learn based on the data we have, who has looked successful in the past? Now, that doesn't mean that we limit ourselves to those people, but we often think about creating profiles in terms of, oh, here are the general characteristics of someone that was successful at our company. They might have had this type of degree or this kind of background or generally this kind of experience before. And so I think in any question that you might have to answer or think about, there are data insights to be drawn as you think about that.
If you're a small business, what would you say they should consider versus a medium or large size business? Because I know you've worked with Fortune businesses and, not everyone fits that bill.
Right.
And maybe it's not even a goal of theirs, and that's fine. Maybe it is. But what should you be considering at the different levels depending on where you're at in business?
So I think the biggest thing is that for a small business, you have much more limited resources, you have much more limited time, you probably have a more limited scope in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. So I think there is about prioritization. What are the most important goals for your company that you can actually use data that you have to get your hands wrapped around? Again, we don't have to have perfect data to have some insights, but I think sort of scaling and scoping projects effectively is a really important part of what you have to think about. When I've worked with really large companies, there the issues are more about marrying very large data sets that cross multiple systems and multiple sort of departments to get to the answers. In a microcosm, you have those same types of issues with a small business. You still have HR data that's different than pricing data, that might be different than other kind of customer data. But still, I think scoping and scaling to answer your question is the best way to make forward progress with data, no matter what size your company is.
Do you have any specific favorite softwares to track it all or anything of that nature? I mean, if I were to say, should I use Microsoft Excel to create a spreadsheet of all the company's important data or Google Sheets, are you going to cringe because I'm suggesting putting it into a spreadsheet to begin with?
No, look, I'm pragmatic about these things. Obviously, it depends on the level of sophistication you're trying to use. I think that, Excel is a valuable tool, and we use it all the time for different sort of purposes. I think as you start to do more sophisticated analyses, you may need more sophisticated programming and things like that. But again, I think, and again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but there's a part of this that is so important. You should always use the tool that is, most appropriate for the task you're trying to do. So if you're doing something where you can actually use Excel appropriately and sort of fit things in to get to the cleanest, simplest answer, I'm a big proponent of that. I think sort of knowing where you kind of hit the limitations maybe is a little more subtle. When is it going to be good enough or not? But in general, I think that Excel is a tool that we use at our firm. I mean, we use all sorts of other programming languages and things that are more sophisticated as well. But it really just depends on the scope and scale of what you're trying to do. But a good Excel graph or a good Excel chart, I love those.
Okay. It just depends on the company. It's not one size fits all.
No, definitely not. And as I said, if it's going to prevent you from doing any data analytics, if we go back to the small business, no, you should work in the tools that you can to at least have some insights. I do think this is an area where some insight is better than none. And again, I think people sometimes are afraid of statistics and they're afraid of sort of, all these statistical techniques. And again, what I encourage people to do is sort of at least trust your instincts that you do know your business and how to identify questions. You can always turn to someone like me to help you sort of think through, all right, well, what's the process and things like that. But at the end of the day, I always try to teach people to sort of be more empowered with data as opposed to sort of being afraid of it.
Okay. Yeah, because there's the people out there, and I used to be, and still very much in a lot of ways, I like to have fun. I like to be colorful and present. I'm sure that doesn't show up anywhere. But when I started in business, I realized you can't just shirk all responsibility and not know the metrics on things, to your point. And but though that's a personality type, because not everyone loves spreadsheets, but the people who do, they swear by them. So I've heard people say, "Oh, I use Excel for everything. I use spreadsheets for everything," and other people are like, "Spreadsheets are trash. You need to be using XYZ software because it gives you so much more insight." But I love what you're saying, because it really depends. If you're doing nothing, the fact that you're even trying to be organized, good for you. And if you're running a like, I can't imagine Apple or Microsoft being like, all right, what column is it in? Just like tracking all their employees, staff, products in different tabs. But if it works, I've heard of stories of stuff like that where it's like, maybe that's the secret. You know what I mean? So
Well, you might be surprised how many big companies maybe aren't as sophisticated with their data as you would suspect,
So
right? I mean,
what
I
is
think that
it then? How do they get to be so large with just, and I know that's the case. I've had some of the owners on the show and I'm just like, you're doing what?
right. Look, I think that the reality is data is a competitive advantage. It doesn't, in certain industries, it doesn't mean it's going to make or break you in its entirety, right? I think that the more data we have, the more competitive industries are, the more likely it is that you really can't ultimately ignore data forever. But that doesn't mean there aren't certain ways where people might be really almost doing a form of the data analysis in their head without actually realizing they're doing it. They kind of, well, we've always set our profit margins this way or that way. Now, I'm not saying at the end of the day that I think that that's a long run strategy for success, especially as sort of we find more and more competitors and more industries. But I do think that I could sit down with a business person who's been in a business for 20 years and talk about their business and their instincts and intuition and identify, oh, so what you're talking about is your data is showing you this. And they might not even realize that, right? So some of it is as simple as just translating and interpreting and understanding, well, you know what, you're actually running that, you're doing that spreadsheet in your head. You may not realize that yet, but that's what you're doing.
I I can relate to that when I'm helping authors publish their business books. It's like, well, I don't have a system, I don't have a process. I'm like, really, to turn into chapters and actually make a book. And I'm like, really? Well, what about this? What about that? What about that? And after 3 or 4 questions, they're like, this is my process, isn't it? And it's like, absolutely. Everyone's running a script. Everyone's running a process. It's just a matter of, have you turned it into an asset and use the data to your advantage versus just spinning your wheels with it. How do you help people see that if they don't already?
Well, I mean, that's a lot of what we try to do. I mean, I was a professor for a few years. I was a little too social to be a professor, quite frankly, but I like to teach people. And so when I talk about empowering people with data, what we try to do is really talk to business owners of any size and say, well, let's talk about what are the problems your business is facing? What are the things that are really pressing for you? And how can we translate that into a data-oriented solution given the data you have? And so again, I think that notion that when people understand that, I'm not coming into your business because I know your business better than you. I'm coming into your business with a tool set that maybe I can help you to understand it better or do a better job executing on your business. And that's really the key to good data analytics, to good data consulting. We call that our data blueprint. And for every business, we can lay out a data blueprint where what's the key issues, what's the type of data you have, how would you think about this, and what are some things you can do statistically to sort of help identify whether they're key performance indicators or just other metrics would help you get to an answer that might inform you in a pretty important, useful, and hopefully profitable way.
Yeah, it makes no sense when you're just guessing. When you can at least look at the metrics, whether you love them or not, when you can look at the metrics and decide, it's so much easier and more enjoyable.
Yeah, I just think it also gives confidence to your decision making, right? I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, you're always sort of guessing. And I think a lot of us in the last year with COVID, with the constant changing economy, a lot of us have had to sort of take our best laid plans and be like, whoa, we got to make some changes because the whole world changed on us. Gives me a lot of confidence as a business owner. I'm like, okay, well, the decisions I have to make, I can support them with data. Now, I may not be right all the time. In fact, I'm not always right all the time, but the data gives me an indication, okay, this is going in a direction I think is helpful, or, oh, I need to adjust. I need to change course. That gives me more confidence to make those decisions with real-time data. And I mean, real time doesn't always mean like instantaneous. I don't have a dashboard updating every 5 seconds with data. I just mean that gives me the confidence as a business leader to really make the decisions I need to, and be more confident that I'm thinking about all the right issues.
I've noticed that's a big thing. And I want everyone to be clear that instantaneous, it's not like you have a stock ticker for every metric going on in the business, but the real-time data, and I would say maybe within 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, at least within 24. I think I would count that as real time more so than even 20, 30 years ago. It seemed like a lot of data. It was like you couldn't get the metrics or the numbers until the next month, maybe the next quarter.
Sure.
I mean, that's very reactive, even if you are doing your best. But
Look,
go ahead.
I agree. No, I was just going to say, I agree. And, there are certain metrics for which, weekly is good enough, right? But I mean, it just depends on what you're doing. But I completely agree. The notion of real time, I think people get a little crisscrossed on, and they think, oh my gosh, if I don't know everything instantaneously, well, you're probably not making instantaneous business decisions anyway. You're thinking about things. And so real time today, what I do agree with you is historically, a week, a few days, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month, but that's still pretty real time for a lot of decisions you'd have to make.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out too, and this just came to me because there's been times where I'm like, woo, whatever. And it's like, let's go have fun, network, do sales, help people, all this stuff. And I really do love all that. And then there's other times I'm like, okay, especially when I launched EA interviews, you'd appreciate this. I actually have a spreadsheet that's 155 or 60 columns long by now, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of guests. And it was a lot to begin with, but I was like, well, what's the file size? Did they show up on time? It started with your name and the title of the episode. But I'm like, well, if I'm going to track this, I can also track the file size and the upload time and the transfer to my team and all these things. And after probably a couple of weeks to a month, it just became this thing, and I'm like scrolling. It's like, maybe I don't need all of this. Most of it really is helpful, though, in all honesty. But then it's like you can get so focused. It's like, did you follow up with anyone today? Did you talk to anyone new? Did you promote the show? So that I do want to note that there's this balance.
Oh,
like you're saying with the real-time data, if you're up to the second with it or the minute or the day, it's like if you're spending so much time in it, don't ignore it. But if you're spending so much time, you're forgetting all the other stuff that's actually driving the needle. Staring at the dashboard alone isn't going to get you new customers or follow up with existing ones.
Well, at some time you have to do your job, right? You can't just, if the only thing we're doing is looking at what's the latest. I mean, yes, part of my job is looking at data all day and night. I'm not talking about that. But what I mean is, if the only thing I were looking at was metrics of performance for my firm, but I'm not actually doing the work of my firm, then that becomes a problem. I mean, there have been clients I've had where it almost becomes like a video game for them.
Right.
They start and they're not very interested in data at all. And by the end, it's like, wow, this is great. And we can do this. And what about this? And what about this scenario? And you're like, okay, well, in the realm of what you're trying to accomplish, at some point, it becomes a little counterproductive, right? What's the phrase? You jump the shark, right? There can be such a thing that you might be focused on too many details and missing the key insights. And so again, I love data. I'm a big proponent of having as much data as you can within reason. But again, I think everything has to be practically balanced against the realities of your business. If you're not thinking with that perspective, then data becomes overwhelming. It's not the valuable tool you need it to be. It's actually can become a hindrance.
Yeah, I was thinking of downloads for the show because I have a dashboard with all the stats when people are downloading. And it's like you could stare at that for a week straight and be like, okay, how come they're not going up? It's like, did you even put one promotional thing or do a guest appearance? Right. Same thing with sales. All right, how much did sales increase the last week? What did you do? So I'm glad we're touching on all this because I love your strategy and approach of look at it, use it to your advantage, but realize, is this beneficial to me or not? I actually didn't think I thought you were going to go into a software and the whole spreadsheet thing. I said it somewhat as a joke, but when you're like, yeah, Microsoft Excel and Google Sheets are great, I'm like, well, I don't love them that much, but I do use them. I prefer the stuff where it's just like my attention span is like, okay, let me look at it real quick. I know where we're at, but good gravy. I don't like the scrolling and figuring it out. Just like, give me the answers.
Look, at the end of the day, as I said, there is a little bit of data analytics for business people where you have to find your comfort zone, because if
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to use the data effectively, then it's not going to help you. And I can have the most,
Mm.
I mean, if you hired me as a consultant, said, come in, analyze your data, I'm probably not doing it in Microsoft Excel. But if you said, I need some way to look at the output from this study, from this analysis, we would talk about, well, what's most user friendly for you? Maybe it is a series of graphs. We've had clients, one of the big projects we did this year was for the NFL Players Association, where we actually helped them build a dashboard with all of the COVID results state by state in every NFL city. And their members had access to a dashboard. So we talked about, well, how could we get that data most accessible to them? And what they wanted was a little map with a dashboard that could be updated, where players could go and just hit a city and it would pop up with what the sort of current testing rates were and what the current number of cases were and things like that, week by week. And so we did that for them. And, that was an example of, the client had data issue, but they really cared about how we communicated the data to their members. And so, again, I'm not saying that there aren't things we can do that are more sophisticated. I don't want to undersell that, but I think what matters most is that was useful and effective because it worked for them and their membership.
And I think that's the use case for most people. My answer would be colorful graphs that are color coded. I don't want to look through a column of data. Just give me the answer in a pie chart.
Look, we talked a little bit before, like in addition to my data analytics work, I also testify as an expert witness on data issues. One of the things I have to do is I have to make information and data accessible to judges and juries, people that don't really want to hear what I
What's
have
their
to say.
preference?
Right. And so thinking about how you teach, I've had cases where I've done lots of sophisticated analyses, but the thing that actually carried the day was a pie chart, because that was the thing that made the most sense. So I think the lessons of all that, and this is the teacher in me, I need to make the data accessible to you and come to you, the place where you are in terms of your learning, your understanding, how you process the data. And a large part of, using data effectively in a business, you hear the phrase, have a seat at the table, right? I think that's a little bit overused, but if I can't convey data in a way that makes sense to the audience, whomever that audience is, it doesn't matter how sophisticated, how great the analysis is, if it's the most insightful thing in the world, the translation, how do I make it make sense, is the really important part for having practical insights.
That's a great expert authority insight. Yeah. You can have all the data in the world, but if it's Greek to the person reading it.
Look, I was an academic, I told you, and I wasn't an academic very long, just a few years. But I always found that, talking in Greek letters and sort of the race to be the smartest in the room, I always wanted to be the one that made everybody else seem like they were the smartest in the room, right? That's how I've done my job well, is if I've talked to you and you're like, wow, I really understand that, I learned something, that means that we're using the data effectively. So I think data analysis, it's multifaceted. And yes, it's about having the data and it's about answering the right question, but then it's about that translation and that skill, the skill set of, can you explain it simply? Can you make it make sense? And can you interpret it? That's a very, very important part that is overlooked, but it is the critical skill, in my opinion.
Well, I'm glad you're sharing it with the audience, because I've talked to people about data before, even before the show, and most of them just go into like, oh my gosh, let me show you all that, and it's like, you might just be asking, how many sales did I close this year versus last year?
Yeah.
You don't need to run a Venn diagram 58 different ways. I mean, you could literally have two numbers with arrows pointing to them, or one higher than the other. So clearly you are the expert, and I'm sure you could give me 1,000 different success stories, but what's your most successful transformation you've been able to give a company that's worked with you?
Well, I think one of our good is, actually it was fairly recently, we had a retail outlet that actually needed some help, and that they were carrying a very large amount of inventory. And they were located in sort of a setting of a museum where because of COVID. I mean, this is the most recent example, but because of COVID, now suddenly things are shut down and they're trying to figure out how much inventory should they be keeping on the shelves. And they had all sorts of interesting low-end items, high-end items. And, really, we just did a pretty simple analysis of their sales and their turnover on their, how much it was costing them to have certain items. And really were able to help them just sort of streamline their inventory so they knew they didn't have to carry anywhere near as much in terms of, one very high-end item that was never going to sell, although maybe it's an attraction, it's not really a successful business strategy to kind of keep that. And so, there's a simple analysis where, it wasn't very complicated necessarily. It was a practical problem they had that they came to us with, and we were able to sort of help them get some real insights about sort of trade-offs in terms of profitability and velocity and things like that. Again, we do lots of these types of things where we're just sort of helping people understand their data. And I think one of the nice parts about our business is we get to work with sort of gigantic companies that have really big problems, but we also really, I think partly because we're so entrepreneurial and because we're a mid-sized business now, we really try to find small businesses we can help as well, because we're like, data analytics doesn't have to be all high end. It's not exclusive to the Fortune 100 companies. And so we try to find ways to help companies at all stages of their development with their data.
Well, I'm glad you are. And I think it's great because while it's fun and, it's intriguing to be like, yeah, we worked with these large companies, like you're saying, which is fantastic. The smaller ones, I would see the benefit to them is they get the expertise of the Fortune companies. And for you, it's probably a lot less work to go. You know what I mean? You're not dealing with hundreds and millions of data sets. I mean, I know one of the largest companies in the world, they employ over 1 million people alone. I'm thinking of some locally and love the owners, love their business, happy for them. They don't have 1 million employees. Now, that's not their business model, but I just know the sheer amounts of it. Sometimes the data, mass data, makes it easier to find frequencies in different things, and it's more revealing. And then other times it's like, you know what? I'm going to take this win. I'm glad it was easier to do. Everyone wins, and, let's just be happy with it.
Well, and I think, again, part of what sort of drives me as a business person is I like to help people, right? I mean, there are times where, in a large company, you might have really valuable insights and you help them perform, but maybe the rewards aren't as obvious as when you help a smaller company that sort of needs help right away. And you're like, wow, those are really valuable insights that we can act on today. I think that's also part of it. So, we kind of view that as sort of the way our analytics company sort of works, is we're sort of are able to handle obviously large scale, giant matters, which we have, but we're also able to handle sort of, one-off smaller companies, small businesses, small business owners. We're like, hey, we have tailored our programs that we have things that are much more focused, much more, pinpointed to help people with their problems. And like, I'm trying, I almost view it as, you can think of it as a trusted advisor, right? I just want somebody who's smart, who I can talk about my data problem with, and who will help me understand the insights and sort of empower me to do it. And so that's kind of been our business philosophy all along. And it does very much tie to the teacher in all of us. I mean, a lot of our profile of our employees are people that are, kind of have come from academic-y backgrounds, but really we're more of the teacher type and less of the academic-y type, if that makes any sense.
It does. And I want to ask you about your background. How did you start the company and what was the inspiration for it?
So I had, as I said, I had been a professor early in my career right out of graduate school. I was going to be the most popular professor on the campus at the University of Illinois, but it just wasn't quite practical enough for me. So I moved to Washington, D.C. at that time, sort of joined a consulting firm. And that firm was, really good to me. I learned a lot about the practical reality of doing consulting and litigation, but I kind of always had this nagging feeling that there was this other skill set I had beyond just being a good data economist, but that I wanted to sort of build a business in a certain way. I wanted to be very customer responsive. I wanted to sort of have very high standards for sort of what the quality of the work was we would do. And I wanted to really make it a meritocracy where people, no matter what their age or what their status, they could succeed if they just worked hard. And that was really sort of the beginning. So I started the firm in 2009 with two people. one who had been at my sort of former firm with me, and then another who'd been one of my undergraduate students who was an HR person. And kind of we started the firm. We had like 7 of us in a little tiny rented space. And then over time, we seemed to sort of started to take off pretty quickly. And today we have about 70 people 11 years later. We've done a lot of cases. We have a really good reputation in our space. And so that's the story is, I was kind of a PhD economist who discovered that I actually was pretty entrepreneurial too. And that's been the most rewarding part by far, is building something a little bit in your own image and then finding other people that share that and building a vision. And then a vision from there sort of led to sort of a really good business model.
Well, congrats on your continued success, and I'm glad you did pick up the entrepreneurial side because it's a lot of fun, and you can help a lot of people with it. And my favorite thing is you're not stuck with all the red tape. It's like if you want to do something, as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, 99% of the time it's like you can just go and do it, find the people, collaborate. It's like you can get stuff done so much quicker.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it is empowering to sort of be able to say, let's think about this carefully, let's go. All right. Well, maybe that wasn't a good decision. Okay, let's pivot. Oh, that was a great decision. All right, let's double down. I just think that flexibility and that fluidity that you can move quicker, faster. You're not tied to every rule the same way at a large company. Now, I will say there's been an evolution. When you go from a small, like 6 of you in a tiny room to 25 people to 70 people, now we have much more of an administrative infrastructure. Now you start to see where you do need certain structures and processes. I mean, there is an evolution of every company. That said, we're really true to our entrepreneurial bent. I mean, we are hungry. We are very customer service oriented. We really guard our reputation because we want to be a high-end place where people know that when we give you an answer, it's objective, it's fair, but it's also something you'll understand. And so that's been really the reward for me, is just watching this thing grow and build and, continuing the excitement of where it will go in the future.
Well, I will tell you it's coming through. I know we just got connected, but it's definitely coming through.
Thank you. I'm really proud of it. It's been really the most formative professional thing in my entire life. Just the fact that I've been able to help build this firm with great people, assemble my team, and I'm working on the next generation. I mean, I'm not anywhere near retirement, but it takes a long time to develop experts. And so, immediately you build a firm, and then it's like, okay, well, now how do we build that? I think we were talking before about, I view it as sort of building a team. I've got to build sort of my, what's the farm system, and then what's going to be our sort of, who's our second baseman? Oh, where do we have this? Oh, what's this piece? And so it's really interesting as we start to kind of go for the next generation. I think 10 years from now, what will this company look like? And
that's exact. I was just going to ask you. I was going to save this for the next part, but I want to ask you, where do you see it going 10 years from now and beyond?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's sort of 2 parts to it. And as I said, one of the reasons why we started the analytics part of the business is we are trying to diversify, because I think it's good to have sort of a broader base than just the sort of primary litigation business. But I hope in 10 years from now that we will have both a cadre of experts on both our litigation side and our analytics side, that we have sort of, I hope I'm an elder statesman by then, not because I want to be put out to pasture, but I want to, part of this is to sort of create an environment where people can grow and thrive and bring their own sort of entrepreneurial bent to the process, serve our clients well. And so, I don't know if we'll be double the size or we'll be the same size. I'm not sure, but we'll be different in terms of our configuration of what we're doing. I suspect we'll be bigger. I mean, we're not content just staying where we are. But right now we're in that process where what we're really trying to do is develop talent. And in some respects, that sort of requires scaling and scoping effectively as you continue to give people the right opportunities. And so that's a lot of what we're in. We're in sort of this growth mindset, but it's a long run growth play, not a short run growth play.
Yeah, because I was just going to say you could have 50 of the right people instead of the 70 versus 200 of
Right. And you just can't sacrifice culture, talent, quality. We have a culture that is very embedded in our firm, that we treat people with respect, that we, Edgeworth actually, not to give a little history lesson, but it's kind of cool. Edgeworth was a famous economist in like the 1800s, but he did, one of his main things was about the gains from trade. And so there's this thing called the Edgeworth box that gets taught in every introductory economics class. And it's kind of geeky, but it's about getting to the point where everybody's made better off and nobody's made worse off. And that sort of hidden in our name is our corporate culture, that what we do is we're trying to make everyone better off. It won't surprise you in the expert witness field and some other consulting fields, oftentimes there's competition for clients. There's, well, my success is at your expense. We've just done away with all of that at our firm. Everybody is rowing the boat in the same direction to make everybody better off. And that's just a really empowering part of the firm.
That's exciting. And I love the backstory. I'm glad you incorporated it in.
We love Francis Edgeworth's birthday is actually on the 6th. When we first started, we would give that off. It also happened to be always the day after the Super Bowl. So in the early years of Edgeworth, we always had the special Francis Edgeworth birthday day off, which was the day after the Super Bowl. Now we just give people a floating holiday, but that sort of had an important meaning in the beginning. Yeah.
Well, I have one more question for you before we go to the imperfect action round, and it involves the wheel of whatever.
Okay.
So, as the name... Oh, no, don't like that. There we go. When I can still see the slats, it's not good.
Okay.
Yellow or black?
Yellow.
Ooh. Look at that. You got yellow.
All right.
So, my question for you is, what do you do to be successful outside of business? What do you do with your personal time?
Okay, that's good. Well, I have a family, although my kids are a little bit older now. My daughter's in college. My son is a junior in high school, and I have a wife. And so what I try to do is some combination of running, although I don't run all the time, but I try to sort of get some kind of activity. And then I also write poetry. So I am a writer. And so I like to write. It's a totally different part of my brain than anything else I use. And so I like to kind of do that. It's a really good way to sort of, you think, wow, you're a data guy. How do you write poetry? But in fact, the way words fit together, the way sounds fit together, the way ideas come together, there's a lot of that. So I do a lot of writing classes. I do online writing classes and those kind of things. And that's sort of a really big hobby of mine, believe it or not.
Wow, appreciate you for sharing that. And that's I was in band, choir, and drama. I play piano and sax.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
I can totally relate to, and I'm a author as well. And
Yep.
I can relate to, that's actually more of what I am. And I had to reel that, I don't want to say reel it back, but I had to discipline myself on the more analytical things, even though I can handle it, and I always have enjoyed it.
Right.
I in high school and college, I never wanted to. I always just liked having fun, but you need both of them for business, and I feel bad for the people who, and it's one of the reasons I do stuff like this and put out my books and different things as well as you do, because now it's like we can take our expertise and give it to someone to help them. Because you have to bridge that gap. If all you know is the craft, but you never have the business side of it, you're not going to have a business. And if you're so oriented on the business, you never do anything outside of that, it's not going to grow as well.
I mean, it's hard. Obviously, when you start a business, any business, it's 24/7. It's an all-in commitment, and you need the support of your family, your friends. I'm just sort of fortunate that I started my business with two of my closest friends, and 11 years later, they're still two of my closest friends, which I think is a success. But
It's a huge success.
I think, but I think at the end of the day, you do have to find other outlets, if for no other reason, both your own sanity, but it makes everything sort of. I find I think of things much better when I'm not doing my job. That's when I kind of sometimes my greatest insights come when I'm trying to write a poem or going for a run or things like that. I'm a workaholic, and it's hard for me sometimes to remember I have to take time for myself. I think that's a lot of us that run businesses have that issue. But at the end of the day, I'm a better business owner. I'm a better husband and father too, if I take time to sort of be at my best.
Well, I love that you're doing it on both sides, and it's like I said earlier, it's definitely showing through. So I got some more questions for you. We're going to thank our sponsor and come back for the Imperfect Action Round. You've heard me say every business needs a book, including yours. And it's true. And that's why you should visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com today to learn the 7 steps to publish and promote your nonfiction lead and profit-generating business book in 8 weeks. But you know what? Don't take my word for it. Take it from a few of my authors, like Lori.
And I went from having an idea and a possibility to actually getting my book published.
Or Catherine.
Thank you for making my mom #1 best-selling author.
Or Mary Alice.
What he got done for me in 3 days regarding my book launch, unmanageable.
John Cody.
I've worked with Mario over the phone and online, and he's been very helpful in getting me where I needed to go with promoting my books.
Rocio.
There's no way in the world I would have been able to do this with somebody else. Again, I've attempted it in the past. It didn't serve me. As a matter of fact, I ended up more frustrated than anything. So this has been a very seamless process.
Adele.
If you're looking for an amazing business coach, I highly recommend Mario Ficini.
Or Bill Benner.
I can't make a higher recommendation than to work with Mario Ficini. He has been great for me, and right now, I won't work with anybody else except for Mario.
Hey, their words, not mine. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com to get started now, and I look forward to hearing your transformation as the next video success story. Once again, that's freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com. And we are back with the Imperfect Action Round. John, are you ready to take imperfect action?
I hope so.
3 questions for you, 60-second or less answers. The first one is, what is the fastest path to the cash?
Good idea and hard work.
Excellent. Number 2, what is the biggest problem you see your prospects making, and for the fastest way for them to fix it?
Not taking the answers their data gives them seriously, and not trusting your instincts with their data.
Okay. 3, what is the best way to maximize customer lifetime value?
Oh, look, I think data or not, it's like pay attention to your customers. I mean, if you are listening to them and you're getting feedback from them, that's the simple best way. I mean, customer service is king.
Excellent. What books would you recommend to expert authority world that have made a difference in your life?
Oh, there's so many. Oh gosh, that's tough. But I think that
you can go up to 5 or 6.
I don't know that I want to do 5 or 6. I just think for me, the book that I always think about, it's getting a little weird, is sort of Life of Pi. I just think that book is sort of such insights about sort of trusting yourself, about meaning of life and things like that. And so I kind of go there first. Again, I told you before, I'm a little bit of a poet. So for me, I kind of I'm not the traditional, there's lots of great business books, but I'm not the traditional business book guy. I'm kind of more of a visionary type person. That's what resonates with me. So that's the one that I immediately think of.
Excellent. And that's not a business book, but it's a good recommendation. And in the same vein of earlier, there's stuff I like to read outside of business too. When I was starting it off, like you said, it was like business, but I've found the more personal stuff you do, the better in business you are. And it's
Absolutely.
fun to just not read another book with a different title that's the same topic as something else or something even I wrote about. So, there's a point. I don't want to downplay it too much, but there's a point where it's like, I'm not a beginner anymore. This is repetitive. Now what?
Well, look, and again, you have to be discerning with your time and what it is you spend your time reading. But for me, I just I look for books for a lot of inspiration. Sometimes I need that more as a leader than I do the latest, greatest MBA technique.
For sure. Well, where would you like people to learn more?
Well, if you go to our website at edgeworthanalytics.com, we sort of have a special sort of launch place, just /expert authority effect, that's where you can read all about our company. We're actually going to give away one of our data blueprint consultations for free to your listeners.
Oh, thank you.
And you can read, our white papers, and we have all sorts of interesting things on our website, some of our recent webinars, things like that. So please check it out. And again, we're really accessible, and we're about helping people solve problems, and really no problem is too small. Sometimes I think people are afraid to reach out, but we scale and scope our work effectively. Even if it's just a half-hour consultation, we can do those kind of things. So I would just encourage people to check it out, and hopefully you'll find something of interest.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, and I'll make sure that the show notes page has the appropriate links.
Terrific.
Well, John, it has been a pleasure, and I appreciate your expertise sharing with Expert Authority World.
Thank you. I've had a really good time. This has been great to talk to you.
All right, Expert Authority World, we have another great episode here today. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day, and God bless. You're already the expert, but have you transformed your expertise into a tangible asset that will generate and qualify leads while increasing profit for you 24/7? And if so, how well are you promoting it? With the Expert Authority Effect publishing method, it's easier and faster than ever. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com today to learn the 7 steps to publish and promote your nonfiction lead and profit-generating business book in 8 weeks. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com to get started now. Once again, that's freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com. Hey, thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you got a lot out of it. I know I sure did. If you haven't done so already, I invite you to subscribe to the show. And also be sure to check out eainterviews.com for complete show notes, the full interview video experience, links to the resources we mentioned, and more. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you tomorrow.